about races writing. This is what growing writers use when they want to write to inform or to answer an informative question. Writing that informs is writing where you inform the reader about a topic and you don't give your opinion. For example, if you were asked to write an essay explaining what birds can do, this would be informative writing. So let's review what each letter of races stands for. And you need your hands ready as we get ready to burn these things in our brain that we started learning last week. Let's start with the R in races. Class?
Yes.
R.
R.
Restate the prompt.
Restate the prompt.
Teach.
Okay.
Teach it.
R. Restate the prompt.
Taylor and Jaden, you should be teaching each other what I just taught you.
Now you're supposed to do it like this. R. Use all the words from the question to create an essay.
Class?
Yes.
A.
A.
Answer all parts of the prompt.
Answer all parts of the prompt.
Teach.
Answer all parts of the prompt.
Class?
Yes.
C.
C.
Cite evidence.
Cite evidence.
What from the text
What from the text
proves your answer?
proves your answer?
Teach. Okay.
Say, what here's evidence to from the text to support your answer.
Use evidence from the text to support your
I just
answer.
said that.
Because you read it on the page and you said not to do that.
No, I said.
Class?
Yes.
E.
E.
How does the evidence
How does the evidence
prove your answer?
prove your answer?
How does the evidence prove your answer?
How does the evidence prove your answer?
Teach.
Okay.
How does the evidence prove your answer?
Class?
Yes.
S. Sum it up.
Sum it up.
Write your conclusion.
Write your conclusion.
Teach. Okay.
Write your conclusion up. Sum it up. Write your conclusion.
Now that we have reviewed what each letter of races stands for, we are going to dive into our practice for today with races writing. In our interactive notebook, we have several pages that can help us. Please open to page 93. On page 93 of our interactive notebook, we have some amazing sentence starters that can help us write using races. I'm noticing I write, we all write. You say, I got it.
All right, we all.
I'm noticing my notes give me some ways that I can restate the question. So I'm going to use my highlighter to highlight some of these sentence starters. Restate the question. Here is a way that I could restate a question. The question says, how are the themes similar in these passages? Well, I could restate that by saying the themes of the passages share similarities. This is the exact same question, but it's restated in a sentence. Let's look at an example of how a growing writer would write an A in races. The A in races stands for answer the question. Use the titles of the passages to answer the question or state your opinion if that's what the prompt is asking. R and A can sometimes be combined. So here's an example. The whipping boy and sand, shells, and sunshine share the same theme. Friends help you overcome. Now, these are my favorite ones when we are looking at ways to cite evidence, the C in races. To cite evidence, you can say things like, in paragraph blank it says, and then quote what it actually says in the text. Or, according to the text, it says. Now, there are more, but I'm going to only highlight my 2 favorite ones, and we'll be using those this week. Your interactive notebook should look just like my screen. So if you haven't highlighted everything I have highlighted, you need to make a change. Now, growing writers always explain the importance of what their evidence proves. And in this class, we say, this explains or this shows. Those are the 2 I'd like you to highlight with me. And then lastly, when we write our S in races, we sum it up by using words like all in all. I also like in conclusion or to sum it up. I'm going to add in conclusion. All students are updating their notes. This is another way to sum it up. Now let's dive into this week's Races Writing Prompt. Please fill in my blank as we look at the prompt in the purple box. You have now read the passage, Endangered Species Grizzly Bear. Write an essay explaining why grizzly bears are classified as omnivores. Use text evidence to support your answer. Now, I cannot write about this prompt if I do not understand it first. So in this class, we will always break down a new prompt using a do-what T-chart so that we know everything we need to include in our writing before we ever start brainstorming. As I'm doing my do-what T-chart, I'm thinking about what is this prompt asking me to do. We call those verbs in grammar. So let's go ahead and think about what is this prompt asking me to do. You have now read the passage Endangered Species Grizzly Bears. Well, that's the first sentence, but it's not asking me to do anything yet. It's just telling me what I've already read, what I already know. Then it says, write an essay. Oh, I think that's something I'm asked to do. So I'm going to brainstorm right on this side, and it's asking me to write an essay. This is called my what. Now, I'm also noticing there's more in the prompt. It says, write an essay explaining why grizzly bears are classified as omnivores. So now I now know my essay needs to explain, this is a verb or something we do, explain why grizzly bears are classified as omnivores. I'm also noticing the very last sentence of this prompt tells me use text evidence. This is also a verb. Use text evidence to support your answer. So now using my do what T-chart, I know I had to do 4 things in this piece of writing. First, I have to write an essay. Then in my essay, I have to explain why grizzly bears are classified as omnivores. In my writing, I need to use text evidence, which is the C in races. And I need to support my answer. Well, that's the E in races. These are the 4 things I must do to answer all parts of this week's prompt. As a growing writer, it is my job to find out of this prompt the most important pieces of information. So you will now see that I'm highlighting the most important parts. Growing writers find what they're asked to do, and they use a do-what T-chart to break it down. Let's go ahead and brainstorm together what our R's should look like in races based on this prompt. Bears are, I'm going to use the word classified because the prompt uses that word, but I want to make my writing a little bit more clear, so I'm also going to say or grouped because grouped is another word for classified. And then we're trying to prove that why they are omnivores. So since my text says that word, I'm going to also say that word. Bears are classified or grouped as omnivores. Now that we have written our R, bears are classified or grouped as omnivores. Tomorrow we will pick up with the A in races. So all students are keeping their brainstorming safe in their writing folder. Let's start by learning our vocabulary words for this week, and we are going to begin with our very first word for this week, the word distract. Our interactive notebook tells us the definition for the word distract is to draw a person's thoughts or attention to something else. I say the word, you say the word, distract. Distract. I say the word, you say the word, distract. Distract. I say the word, you say the word, distract. Distract. Very good. Notice that definition, to draw a person's thoughts or attention to something else. I also notice I can use it in a sentence. The noise coming from outside distracted the student during the test. Oh no. Also, notice a synonym for the word, draw away. And then I have 3 different pictures. I would like for you to choose the one that helps you understand this word the most and draw it on your interactive notebook. So you can choose to draw this driver who is distracted by their cell phone, which is very unsafe. Or there I am, sometimes distracted when I should be sleeping. I bet some of you might do that too sometimes.
Every single night.
And then here is my favorite example. This is from the movie Up. This dog is always distracted. So notice he says, I have just met you, and this is Crazy Butt Squirrel, because he's distracted. Please choose one and draw it in your interactive notebook. Our second word for this week is actually 2 words. We will call it a phrase. Distinguish between. Notice our definition. To be able to tell the difference between 2 things. Notice my picture. There's 2 different felines or cats. We have a leopard and we have a tiger. You can probably distinguish between them. One has stripes and one has spots. That's called distinguishing between the 2. Noticing that they're different in some way. And then I'm noticing a synonym or a word that means the same. Compare. And I bet that's a word you are more familiar with. So the word distinguish between, or the phrase distinguish between, means to compare. At this time, all students are drawing their image of the word distinguish between. Our last word for this week is the word recognize. Our notes tell us that recognize means to know and remember upon seeing. So a synonym for the word would be remember. And I can use it in a sentence by saying the student recognized a vocabulary word in the book he was reading. He remembered it because he had seen it before. In my image, I can see 2 people seeing each other, and the boy says, hey, I know you from school. He recognizes the girl. So notice that image, and at this time, all students are drawing an image in their interactive notebook that helps them remember the word recognize. And noticing our notes on today's focus skill for reading ask us to think about the difference between explicit information and inferences. Explicit information is found right there on the line. The text shouts it out loud and it's right there on the page. We can touch it. Inferencing is when we have to read between the lines. We have to look for clues, and it is whispered, not shouted. These are the types of questions you actually have to kind of think about instead of just find in the passage. Now, I'm also noticing our notes give us 3 steps that growing readers use to make an inference. Our notes tell us that growing readers start by thinking about what they already know. This is called our schema. Everybody say schema. 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 Then they think about, what does the text say? This is what we call evidence. Everybody say evidence. Evidence. And then lastly, they make their inference by adding those 2 things together. Everyone say inference. Inference. As we think about our notes in our interactive notebook found on page 41, our notes give us some clues about how we can grow in making inferences. Authors don't always tell their reader everything. They rely on the reader to use inferential thinking to understand everything going on in the story. I'm going to highlight my formula. Text clues plus background knowledge equals an inference. Thank you to those who are highlighting with me. Now we have an example in our notes of how a growing reader might use this formula. My heart started to race as I stared down at the broken pieces. How will I be able to explain this when my mom gets home? I thought to myself. This is my text clue. Now I'm going to think about what I already know. Well, I think the character is probably a kid because they mention their mom. I also think the kid is nervous because that's what happens when your heart races. I'm going to highlight heart races. Now, as a growing reader, I can add these 2 things together. And when I add them together, that will lead me to an inference. So I'm noticing it says my inference is the kid accidentally broke something important to his mom. And he is nervous about telling her when she gets home. This is an inference. I had to use my clues, what I already knew, and that led me to an inference. I'm also noticing on the right side of page 41, I have some examples of how a growing reader would infer. This includes a character's feeling, what they might do or say that leads me to understand them more, how the setting impacts the story, how the author reveals information in the story, how conflicts are handled or how problems are handled, and then lastly, what might happen. This is called a prediction. That's a type of inference. Growing readers base their inferences and answers on text evidence. So our notes give us a definition of what text evidence is. This is words from the text that readers can use to support their ideas about the text. Notice our notes tell us good readers take notes or mark up the text while reading nonfiction in order to find text evidence for their ideas. And we've even learned in writing today that growing writers use words like the author said and according to the text in races. So notice what text evidence is. On the right side of page 43, you can see some more examples of how you can use text evidence. Like the author said, and then there's quotation marks. It is important to know that a growing reader always finds their answers and proves their answers by going back to the text and using text evidence. Over the last couple of days, we have been reading an informational text about grizzly bears. Today, we are going to use this text to answer questions that are found right there and make inferences based on clues in the text. I have a graphic organizer where I will be modeling 2 questions. The first question says, which is larger, a male grizzly bear or a female grizzly bear? Male. Now, as a reader, I'm not going to guess because that is lazy. But instead, I'm going to go back to the text where I can find my answer. So I'm looking for where the text tells me what is larger. I'm going back to the text. Here I have my text, and I'm looking for which is larger. I'm noticing in paragraph 1, it says the grizzly bear is a type of brown bear. It is one of the largest land animals in North America. An average male grizzly has a head and body length of 6 to 8 feet. It can weigh up to 800 pounds. That's all about a male. Now let's see what it says about a female. Female grizzly bears are smaller. They weigh between 200 and 400 pounds. So now I can distinguish between a male and a female, or I can compare them. 800 to 200 or 400. So a female grizzly bear weighs about half of what a male grizzly bear weighs, around half. I'm going to begin by writing my answer in my words. So based on what I know, I'm going to answer using my words first. Which is larger? A male grizzly bear is larger than a female. All students are watching as I model. I now have my answer in my words. A male grizzly bear is larger than a female. So now I'm thinking about how I can prove that answer straight from the text. I already went back and found the highlight. Now I just need to write it using one of those sentence starters that we've learned from our interactive notebook. So let's see if I can go ahead and do that. I'm going to use the sentence starter. The text says, comma, and then I'm going to write open quotation marks. And I'm actually going to go straight back and write it word for word to prove my answer. The text tells me here, my answer, female grizzly bears are smaller. Then it says what they weigh. So I'm going to copy that word for word into my graphic organizer. I now have the text says female grizzly bears are smaller. They weigh between 200 and 400 pounds. And then I'm going to put a quotation mark around it. Since the text tells me they're smaller, this supports my answer that the male grizzly bear must be larger. I'm now noticing I have a second question. What can the reader infer about the Native American tribes who worked with the United States government? I'm going to go back to the text. I'm noticing as I go back to the end of the text, and I'm going to use my highlighter to find my answer. It says, the government worked together with the Native American tribes. The efforts were very successful in some places. As a result, the overall grizzly population increased. So I have to make an inference about who these people are, what kind of people they are. So since the text says they worked with them, this tells me something about their character. I can infer something about them. I'm going to answer in my words on my graphic organizer. And I'm going to use a sentence starter to help me infer. I infer the Native Americans were a respectful group of people in this situation. I'm going to say were respectful. Now, the author does not tell me this. I have to use the clues to create something new. This is called an inference. I infer the Native Americans were respectful. And now I'm thinking about how I might improve this answer. I already know, based on what I've highlighted in the text, that their efforts were successful. and that they worked with the government, this tells me they must have respected their choice and also wanted to protect the grizzly bears as a group of people. Please notice, as we're thinking about what growing readers do, I'm now going to prove my answer with that same sentence starter. So in this class, we say the text says, and then we prove it straight from the text. I'm thinking about the strongest text evidence. The text says, and now I'm going back to the text. I see where it says, the government worked together with the Native American tribes. The efforts were very successful in some places, and because of that, the population increased. So if I want to prove that they were respectful, then I think my strongest evidence would have to be that they worked with the government. So I'm going to say the government worked together with Native American tribes as my evidence. So notice I want my evidence to prove my answer, which was that they were respectful. And if they were willing to work with the government, they must have been a pretty respectful people. The author did not tell me that. I created something new based on a clue.